Gabby, how you doing today?
I am feeling super fabulous. I am very excited for today's episode. I've been thinking, the past couple of days, what stories I'm going to share, and I think this one's going to be a fun treat for people.
I think so too. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Eternal Void, but with Jazz podcast. We've got your hosts, Michelle and
Gabby.
Hey, what's up, Gabby? We do not have a guest this week, so instead we are going to do a spooky, weird, interesting story episode. Gabby is over in Massachusetts, and I am here in Detroit, Michigan. What we're going to be doing is trading stories from each of our respective local areas about spooky things, interesting things, neat things, cryptic things. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it. Gabby, what's your first story for us today?
Yeah. So, as you all know, I am from Massachusetts. And for those of you who don't know, Massachusetts is home to a lot of really interesting firsts. We were the first place to create free public school. The Boston Latin School opened in 1635. So before America was even America, we were still technically a colony at that point. The first university over here, Harvard, in 1636, and the first public library, all in Boston, and that was 1653. So yeah, kind of whenever I think of Massachusetts, I think of it as sort of like the home of a lot of different American firsts. And some of you may not know, we are also the home of the first recorded UFO sighting. So today we're going to be starting with a very strange and interesting UFO story. And I'm using UFO purposefully because this involves an unidentified flying object. Something that, we may not know what it is. We may know what it is. Once we get into the details, it'll be kind of up to you all to decide what went on here. So we're going to take you all back to 1639. So way back when. And this is going to take place in Boston, the Boston area in what was originally known as Charlestown. So Boston wasn't really quite what it is today. It was more so a bunch of little villages all kind of grouped together, and Charlestown was one of those. So the governor of Massachusetts at this time was a man known as John Winthrop. And we actually got this story from his writings. So the actual governor of Massachusetts at the time is the one who documented this particular UFO case. So what happened? So one night, there were these three men. One of them was this guy named James Everell. He was out boating on what is known as the Muddy River in Charleston, now Boston. And while they were out boating at night, they happened to notice this weird light in the sky. And this was not a tiny little light. In John Winthrop's writing, he said it was 3 by 3 yards, so 9 feet by 9 feet in size. So this giant, massive light. And this light appeared in the sky and seemed to transform into what the men described as a swine. So giant light turned into a giant pig and then started running back and forth across the sky.
Wow. Okay, I have so many questions. Please, go ahead.
Okay. It gets even weirder. Like this is just the beginning of this weirdness. So these three men weren't the only people to witness this light, because it wasn't like it was just moving in one little area. No, it was darting back and forth across the length of this huge sort of river watery area. So this light was covering a distance of about 2 miles back and forth. And a whole bunch of the villagers were obviously looking up in the sky and saying, what the heck is going on? And they even described it that it was running as swift as an arrow. So like imagine like this wicked fast light just darting back and forth. So of course, after all this happened, all the villagers are kind of like stirred up and wondering like, well, what's going on? So this was actually like so impactful that it even caught the attention of, modern day UFO researchers. It was even included in Jacques Vallée's, one of his books, Wonders in the Sky. It's a book about all kinds of aerial objects from antiquity to, sort of modern day. So what was it that these people saw? Because sure, there were the three men who initially witnessed it, but there were also these other witnesses. So back then, there was no technology, there were no drones, there were no kind of airplanes, anything that we normally assign as being kind of a UFO, right? There's really nothing technological that we can say was happening in the sky, because this was the 1600s. We didn't have that technology yet. So here's one potential more materialist explanation. There is a phenomenon known as ignis fatuus, fool's fire. And it's essentially a natural phenomenon that occurs in swampy areas. So when organic matter starts to decompose, it decomposes in usually like one of two ways: either aerobic decomposition, so it's exposed to air, all those kind of natural elements, and it breaks down into certain, elements and all of that. But then there's also anaerobic decomposition. So this is for organic matter that's buried under, swampy materials. And since it's buried, it's not exposed to the oxygen, anaerobic, no air, basically. And how it decomposes is that there are these little bacteria and other kind of creatures living, in the swamp, essentially. And they eat and consume whatever is there. And then they produce methane, phosphine, and diphosphane. And these chemicals, whenever the swamp guck is kind of, swirled up and is exposed to oxygen, it undergoes certain chemical reactions. So it can create essentially little bursts of light. So that's one potential explanation. If you've ever been out in a swamp, you might have even seen like these weird little lights kind of popping up. But this was not one tiny little light in one little swampy area. This was allegedly, 9 by 9 feet in the sky, darting back and forth across a 2-mile radius, essentially. So what was it? We don't know. So all we can really say is that it was a UFO.
That is wild. Oh my gosh. What do you think it was?
I actually have no idea. I like to think that it was potentially something, more interesting than just, different gases reacting to oxygen.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I think it definitely has to be something. Massachusetts has a lot of different interesting folklore around lights. So even like the ignis fatuus phenomenon itself is sometimes read as being like this spiritual thing. It's where we get the idea of like the jack-o'-lantern, right?
Right.
So like this
Will-o'-the-wisp.
person, the will-o'-wisp, exactly. Yeah. This being that's sort of carrying this lantern of light. So who knows, maybe there's this sort of entity that they just happen to, catch sight of it, because, and this I didn't even mention yet, the three men who were, in this boat, once the light finally disappeared, because eventually it just sort of faded out, like they said, it faded away, the men found themselves a mile upstream with no memory of actually making that journey. They were just sort of
right.
Teleported
there. Of course.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. No, and that's, and that goes back to like, what can we call it? Like the, what did Joshua say when he was on our show? Like things are like over here, like 80% material, 20% psychic, and who's to say, like maybe over there it's 80% psychic and 20% material. So anything else happened to those guys, or was there any other information on this?
As far as we know, it kind of just ends there. But I think it's just fascinating that, there was this event that was so impactful that, somebody thought to write it down, and not just anybody, the governor at the time. So somebody who was perceived as this authority figure, the sort of keeper of, the history they were trying to create. And, this story has persisted into the modern day, and people keep reporting, incidents like this. And another story I'll be sharing later has some strange connections to this case, which we'll find out.
I'm down for that. Well, I've got a story for you. This was, I thought this was really cool. So a little bit of a departure from the UAP, I can't say it, UFO story. And let's go over to the ghost story cabinet for a minute. Let me pull this up. All right. So basically, like on our last episode, we were talking with Gregory about the LGBTQ gun rights, but we riffed on Michigan City of Dreams and the Dream Cruise for a while, and talking about how all those classic cars basically went up that boulevard that goes between downtown Detroit and Pontiac. So on the far end of this, right in the center of downtown Detroit, almost right on the Detroit River. And I'll put some links in the show notes for some of these pictures I'm about to share with you, Gabby. But if you want to check our normal chat, I'll share some interior pictures while we're talking. There is a restaurant called The Whitney that is built out of a 21,000 square foot mansion that dates from the turn of the 19th century here in Detroit. And it is supposedly haunted. So I want to talk about that for a little bit. So a lot of this comes from Michigan.org, from Odyssey.com, from the Whitney's website itself. And I might have pulled, Odyssey.com. So from WWJ 950 News Radio. We'll have the links in the show notes. So we've got the Whitney restaurant, named for David Whitney Jr. He was one of the Midwest's wealthiest lumber barons at the turn of the century. He was married, wanting to start a family, from what I understand. And in 1894, he built this 21,000 square foot home. It had a carriage house. It was ginormous. It was right in like the heart of what was downtown Detroit at the time. I don't know how much Detroit was built up at the time, but that's a little bit outside the scope, but I would love to know. But this building is just absolutely fabulous. Like, it looks beautiful masonry, stonework. It's got some great, like, if you've never seen the architecture, especially in downtown Detroit, and also like the glasswork, it's phenomenal and it's beautiful, and there's so much history here. I definitely recommend visiting this city and checking this out. You're sleeping on it if you're not. This place is haunted, let me tell you. So EVPs are a thing. According to, like, fast forwarding, this place was built pretty soon thereafter. Let me take a look here. Basically, as soon as the house was built, as these things happen or are written about, like, things started going a little wrong, right? So the house was built in 1894. Whitney's first wife died in 1882, so she didn't even get to see the house. I guess it was planned. But so she passed away in 1882. Within a year, as apparently things were done in different times, Whitney married his deceased wife's sister, Sarah. So Flora was the original wife. Sister Sarah later became the stepmother to the family's 4 children, and they all built the house and moved in. The house has changed ownerships many times. It's been a restaurant since 1986. Before it was a restaurant, it was, so it was transferred Oh, after the second wife, Sarah, died in 1917, the mansion was eventually transferred to the Wayne County Medical Center, used as a tuberculosis ward for some time. And then where else did I see that it was also used as like a nurse's station? Let me look that up. Where did I read that it was a nurse's station? Okay, well, I can't prove it, so we'll just come back to that. So tuberculosis ward for some time. Eventually, it was bought in the mid 80s. Entrepreneur Richard Kuhn, Kughn, restored the building so the public could enjoy it and turned it into a restaurant in 1986. Fast forward to 2007, former Chrysler executive Bud Liebler bought the building, did some more renovations, including a state-of-the-art kitchen. And get this, Gabby, get this. I've been like leaning forward, just wanting to read these words like for a minute. And new features like the third floor's ghost bar were added. How cool is the word ghost bar or phrase, right?
I love it. I want to go.
Yeah, me too. And that's the best part. It is not prohibitively expensive.
Yay.
You can do a late night paranormal tour at this place for, it looks like, $39 per person. You can do a paranormal dinner experience. Let's see, beginning it from the Whitney's website. Beginning at 5 p.m., this evening includes a historical champagne tour of the mansion, a 4-course dinner with selected spirits. I want to know more about the 4-course dinner with selected spirits. What spirits were not selected? Why did you select the spirits that were invited? What are you doing to keep the unwanted spirits away? Because I want to know who put that idea together. Why are the unwanted spirits not there? Why not invite all the spirits? I want to know. So we've got that, followed by a paranormal expedition. You know what I just realized? The selected spirits is probably referring to alcohol. How about that? So after that, followed by a paranormal expedition through the mansion, gardens, and the carriage house. Tickets for this are $199 per person, include the dinner, the selected spirits, tours, tax, and gratuity. Valet parking's additional. So I would totally do that for $199. That actually sounds like kind of a fun night.
Yeah.
But that's also, that's some money. So, whatever. The food looks amazing. Anyway, so moving forward, I want to talk about the carriage house. In the process of all of this, I did read from another source that the carriage house is also haunted. Apparently, Whitney had a daughter who was away at the time that, actually, let me back up just a minute. I remember where I read this and I can do... Okay, so within 6 years of building this house, Whitney died of a heart attack in the mansion in 1900. That sucks. Families grieving. Whitney's daughter, Grace, was in Europe at the time of the father's passing and was unable to say goodbye. So one thing that Grace really enjoyed was having tea in the home's carriage house, which is located just next door to the building. So what apparently has been done for I don't know how long, but at least at the time of this writing, was a placement for tea, and a tea set is always kept set in the carriage house for Grace. The carriage house was not renovated, so it is kind of dilapidated, but this tea is still set for Grace at all times. And it is said that if the tea set is moved or otherwise pestered, there will be a lot of poltergeist activity going on. So you don't want to move the tea set unless you want to trigger a lot of poltergeist activity. And I wonder, is that a ghost or is that collective projection onto ritual implements? Or is it a little from column A and a little from column B? That's kind of where my brain was going as I was reading that. I just put this source in our chat, and if you want to take a look, you can see...
Oh.
Yeah, I'm going to copy the image link directly for you. And all of these sources will be in the show notes. There's the carriage house with the tea set.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah. So it's been featured on multiple ghost hunting TV shows. Apparently it's not difficult to get an EVP at this place. You can get like, hi, how are you? Hello. People have reported getting responses to, like, if you can hear this, knock 3 times, and getting 3 loud knocks and, stuff like that. So, according to Michigan.org, one of the writers, Kat, was standing on the second floor when the atmosphere, strangely enough, changed around her. Just as people had explained, the atmosphere became thick, charged. She said, "I'm getting something here." Later, when the audio was reviewed, a disembodied voice was clearly heard saying, "That's right," followed by the words, "I'm still here." So that is the Whitney Mansion and Restaurant in downtown Detroit, right down by the Detroit River.
Oh, that is super cool. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned it's right near the Detroit River. Because
You know
again,
what? Yeah.
there's like this whole water theme coming up with all
Yeah.
of this paranormal stuff.
You're not wrong there. Okay, so I'm pulling this up right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not right on the Detroit River, but it's as the car drives, not as the crow flies. It is a 2.8-mile drive to the Detroit riverfront from the Whitney. Without these turns, probably like 2.5 miles. So I would say that's pretty close to a river.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the story of the Whitney.
Oh yeah, now I'm wondering if I want to change up the order a little bit. I think instead of jumping into more alien stuff, I'm gonna go to the one that I was originally gonna do last, because
Okay.
I feel like there are a few similarities between your story and this one. So this story is going to take place close to Boston, but not quite. We're going to be moving over to Salem. So everybody listening to this podcast probably knows a little bit about Salem, Massachusetts, and the history with the witch trials, with how it's sort of like this modern day witchy mecca. Like if you practice witchcraft, you've probably daydreamed about visiting Salem someday. But we're not going to be talking about the witchy side of things today. We're going to be talking more ghosts. So this is going to take place at the Hawthorne Hotel. So if you've ever been to Salem, this is one of the most popular hotels in Salem. It's one of the oldest as well. First became a hotel in 1925. They just celebrated their whole 100-year anniversary and everything. So yeah, it's sort of like a main feature of Salem history. And the building itself has some interesting history to it as well. I won't be getting into that history too much today, but I highly recommend checking it out, especially if you're interested in sort of maritime history, like naval boat type stuff, because there's quite a bit of involvement there. So what's the deal with the Hawthorne Hotel, and why is it, sort of one of the most popular hotels in Salem? Well, it's allegedly haunted. Now, if you ask the hotel staff themselves if it's haunted, they'll kind of give you this non-committal answer. In fact, they even have it addressed in their hotel FAQ. And I actually want to take a quick moment, and we'll have all the links to this in the show notes. I want to take a moment to actually read their little answer online, because I think it's just so cute. So the question is the hotel haunted? And the answer: while not confirmed, some guests have shared personal stories of haunting experiences. If you are looking for a spooky experience, you may get one. On the other hand, most of our guests sleep peacefully without noticing any paranormal activity. So I don't know.
Okay.
I love that. I think that's just so fun.
Well, that's interesting. It also kind of says, like, if you're looking for ghosts, you're going to find them, right?
Exactly. And that brings us to the first little detail that I want to mention about, the Hawthorne Hotel hauntings. So for those of you familiar with the Salem witch trials, I guess we are going to talk about it a little bit. One of the people who was unfortunately killed was a woman named Bridget Bishop. And Bridget Bishop was sort of known for having this beautiful apple orchard. And a lot of people like to claim that Bridget Bishop's apple orchard is on the land where the Hawthorne Hotel now stands. And this belief has gotten so prevalent. Sorry, the random background change. I love it. So because of this, a lot of people will report the smell of fresh apples whenever they're in the Hawthorne Hotel. And in fact, the Ghost Hunters crew went to the Hawthorne Hotel once, and they even put this idea out that, this is where Bridget Bishop had her apple orchard, and, her spirit lingers in the hotel because, she's upset at what happened, but, also sort of forgiving, like she's a positive spirit who creates this scent of apples. Well, in reality, it was not the location of her apple orchard. Her apple orchard was somewhere completely else. But that doesn't completely eliminate, all of these people who claim that they smelled apples in this location. So kind of like what you mentioned, Michelle, with the tea set and how if people move it, there might be poltergeist activity, and whether that is the actual spirit herself or kind of the expectation. It does seem that if you walk into an allegedly paranormal location, you might get exactly what you're looking for, even if there is no real, like, physical explanation or even spiritual explanation. Because even with the Hawthorne Hotel itself, there really isn't any explanation as to why it's so haunted. And it's so haunted that it was even labeled the 4th most haunted hotel by Travelocity back in 2007. So that means a lot of people are reporting, very intense spiritual activity as well. People report water faucets turning on and off, toilets flushing, mysteriously with no cause. One woman.
That's a lot of water.
Again, more water. And get this. The top floor of the Hawthorne Hotel, the very top room, is styled after the interior of a ship's room. So think like a captain's cabin. It's all wood and, very ornate and interesting. And it has a direct view of the water. So if you look out, you can see the water is a little bit farther away, but you can still see it. And one of the alleged activity is some people see ships in the distance, ghost ships, just floating across the water. One woman and her young son were staying in the Hawthorne Hotel one night, and the child started crying and said that he heard, a woman, crying out and calling after him, basically. It's gotten so intense that they even know sort of which rooms are associated with this kind of activity. The main rooms are 325 and 612, with 612 being one of the more haunted ones, with people even witnessing apparitions, like full body apparitions, including a woman just sort of walking around in the room. So the reason why I wanted to pick the Hawthorne Hotel out of all the, potential haunted locations in Salem, because there's tons of them, is because I've actually had an experience in the Hawthorne Hotel. So this was a number of years ago, got to be probably 5 years ago by now. I was staying in the Hawthorne Hotel with my family. Because every year they have this movie festival in town, and we were there for the movie festival. And we were staying at the Hawthorne Hotel, not because it was haunted. I knew it was haunted, but I didn't really look into what the details of the hauntings were, because it was just kind of like, hey, this is just where we're staying. Yeah. And, one night, we only stayed 1 or 2 nights. One night while I was there, I go into the shower. I'm washing my hair, right? And I have my back to the faucet behind me as I'm washing my hair. and I like a nice hot shower, right? And
Yeah.
all of a sudden the water starts getting like really like lukewarm and cold. And I'm like, this is awful. Like, I've only been in here 5 minutes. I should not be running out of hot water, in this
Right.
hotel. It's a nicer hotel. Like, they should have hot water. So I turn around to, just turn the water up, thinking, oh, I must have just ran it out already. And it's one of those faucets where, it has like a lever and you kind of like push it up or down to get like hot water's up, cold water's down. So
Yeah.
I had it kind of upwards, right?
Yeah.
Not touching it. I see it slowly turning downwards as if somebody is just turning it towards the cold water and not touching it. And like, it wasn't loose. Like, I checked it to see if it was loose, or to this day, I cannot explain why the faucet was moving. There is nothing that would indicate that it was broken, but there it was. I guess the spirit was mad I was wasting all the hot water or something.
And no, that's wild. Oh my gosh, how cool. Gabby, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So what, you just like turned the handle back up and everything was gravy?
There was definitely a minute where I was like watching it, because it wasn't like quick. Like, it was moving for like a good 5-10 seconds.
Oh,
and
shit.
I'm just like watching it, like, is this really happening? And then I just kind of like quickly turned it back up to the hot water and was thinking like, okay, I kind of want to get out of here.
Yeah, okay. It's like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Point taken.
Wow. I love it. Well, that's really cool. That sounds like a really nice hotel, and Boston's got so much history. That's really awesome.
Yeah, the whole area is just, steeped in history. And that was like the tricky part of coming up with the stories this week, because there's so much, that I could talk about. Like, we're not even going to get into like the Bridgewater Triangle today,
right?
Which is, the other sort of big thing that Massachusetts is known for. But there's just so much weirdness around here.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, we're even Lovecraft country, right?
Yeah.
A lot of H.P. Lovecraft stories were inspired directly by different places in Massachusetts. And one of these days I'll have to like send you different pictures, because once you see it, you'll understand why.
Oh, please
like,
do.
The woods and everything, like, they're creepy, but also very comforting.
Okay. Oh, I love everything about it. Yeah. Cool. I'm going to have to check that out. All right. Well, the next one I've got for us is a little bit shorter, but it was a really cool story. So this all started because I was looking for stories of Mothman sightings in Detroit to see if there were any. Because so there's apparently a lot of what's known as the Lake Michigan Mothman sightings, which our friend Tobias Wayland has chronicled and written about for many, many years. Tobias, cool people, wrote a book on the Lake Michigan Mothman. The unfortunate part there is the Lake Michigan Mothman is primarily stories about Mothman sightings around Lake Michigan, which is the other side of the state of Michigan and more of a Detroit or more of a Chicago phenomenon. So that dominated the search results, and I couldn't find anything about Detroit Mothman per se, or even in the area. But what I did find was a cool story about something else moth-related at the Detroit airport. So there is a species of moth, or a whole genus. Is it a genus or a phylum? It's a family of moths with many, many, many subspecies called the Pyralidae family. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Pyralidae family of moths, or snout moths. And one particular moth that is really pretty with like this gold and black pattern. I am putting the link in the chat for you right now, Gabby. Ooh. Really pretty moth. Was first discovered and described in 1912 and then never seen again until 2022. There was a person traveling through the Detroit airport, I guess to Detroit, from the Philippines. And they had to, as international travelers do, go through customs. And customs is probably going to look through your stuff. So, especially, so anyway. So customs is probably going to look through your stuff under situations. This person had a bunch of seeds for medicinal tea usage. Customs noticed that a few of the seeds had boreholes in them from insects. And they were like, well, this is do you want ant? Like the whole Archer joke, do you want ants? This is how you get ants. And except in this case, do you want invasive species? This is how you get invasive species. So they confiscated the seeds. They have entomologists on staff to identify these things. I had to make sure I wasn't getting that confused with the other word. So they have entomologists on staff to identify these things. They found some seed pods inside these seeds. They let the seeds hatch, and lo and behold, it was this particular moth that had not been seen since 1912. So we know that this particular moth population is alive and well, despite having been underground at the time of this discovery in 2022 for 100 years. So that is my Detroit moth story, as one does.
I love that. That's so magical.
Right?
It's like something, reappearing. Like I feel like moths are, even though they're not like butterflies, like we don't really see them as like, oh, they're beautiful, whatever. They still represent, that kind of rebirth symbolism. And I think they're beautiful. I think they're super cool.
Yeah, and maybe one day we'll find some Detroit Mothman sightings, or maybe even some witnesses or something we can talk to. And we're still going to be on the lookout for having that conversation. And if you know of any Detroit Mothman sightings, please write us. You can catch us at evjpod@zmail.com. That's Z like Zoom, or Serana's Bow, Seranas, bow @gmail.com. So, Gabby, what you got for us?
Yay. Okay. So for our last story on my end, we're going back to aliens.
Yes.
But we're jumping forward into the future a little bit over 300 years. So our last alien story took place 1600s. Now we're jumping forward to October 1st, 1966. And we're also jumping from Boston to Cape Cod. So for those of you who aren't super familiar with Massachusetts geography, that's sort of like the arm part of the state. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in the town known as Truro, Massachusetts. And this case is sort of known as the Truro alien abduction. So this sort of takes our last story a little bit of a step further, which is really interesting. So October 1st, right? There is this man known as Robert Matthews, and he worked as an airman in the military. And he was just sort of going about his day, right? It was early in the morning, 8:45, or actually it was late at night, 8:45 p.m., sorry. Yeah, late at night, heading home, or heading back to his base, basically. He was originally on a bus. He took a bus to a place that was known as Dutra's Market. It's now known as Salty Market in the north part of Truro. He was the only one to get off of the bus at this particular stop. And he got off of the bus because he wanted to use a payphone to basically call the base and ask for a ride, back home, back to the base. Because I guess the route didn't go all the way. So he had to kind of make a little pit stop. So he gets off the bus. He was kind of in a rush. So he runs inside, uses the payphone, and hangs up. And he goes outside to wait for his ride to pick him up. And while he's waiting outside of this little, kind of marketplace, he looks up to the sky and sees these lights, off in the distance. And he's just kind of like watching them. And he says he gets like this weird feeling. So he goes back inside and calls again, says, kind of like, hey, pick me up. Weird stuff's going on. But when he calls, the person on the phone is like, well, where were you? And he goes like, what? So essentially what had happened was, in his mind, he had called, went outside, went back inside and called. But what had really happened was he called, went outside, an hour had passed, and then went back inside and called. And they had even sent a car. They had looked for him. No idea what had happened.
Oh, wow.
When he was questioned about it, because when he did get on base and kind of explained what went on, they're like, were you drunk? Were you under the influence? Kind of like what happened. And they could never conclusively find. So fast forward 2 decades later, the guy happens to be like hanging out, and he happens to look at a bookshelf in 1987 and sees a copy of Bud Hopkins' book, Intruders, which is all about, aliens and stuff. And there's aliens on the cover. And he immediately like recognizes, these sort of gray alien types. And so he decides to undergo hypnosis in hopes of uncovering his memory, like what had happened during that experience. And he recalled that he saw 3 lights in the sky. The lights then landed near him, and he saw a whole ship. The ship opened up. These 6 slender gray-skinned beings with large heads and large eyes came out of the ship and kind of like picked him up, took him into like a little medical exam room, examined him a little bit. They were talking in a weird alien language. And then they basically dropped him back off when they were done, and they were on their way. And so then he just kind of had this realization of like, oh my gosh, I guess I was on an alien ship. That's what happened.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. So what happened to him while he was on the ship? They just gave him the exam?
Yeah, he said it was kind of like a medical environment, like being in a doctor's office. And they like looked at his chest and like just kind of just gave him like a once over. And then like they were like, he said that they were talking to each other, but they were speaking in a language that he did not know. So he's not really sure like what they said, but yeah.
Oh my gosh, how wild. I love it. And again, water everywhere.
Yeah, the Cape is water on all sides almost.
Really cool. This episode's going to need a lot of editing, and it's all because of me, myself.
No, you're all good.
Girl, we are so good. We are rocking this. So back to it. My last story is actually UFO tinged as well. Mm-hmm. I've got a few little articles of interest about UFO sightings and UFO adjacent things about like the Detroit and southeastern Michigan area in general. We talked about the Hynek swamp gas cases. Those all happened in a few areas in like southern Michigan, not too close to where I'm at or Detroit, but closer than not, right? But the first thing I want to talk about is a report released by New Fork that I grabbed from the Fox 2 Detroit website that they were reporting on. It looks like, let me open this link and remind myself. Yeah, so this was posted in June of 2025, so a little under a year ago. And this is the Michigan cities with the most UFO sightings according to New Fork. At least 4 of these are what I would call my backyard. So there's that. Mm-hmm. So number 10 is going to be Sterling Heights with 42 sightings. Number 9 is Holland, Michigan with 44, which is, if I recall correctly, on the other side of the state. And like its namesake, they've got some really cool stuff going on with tulips that should be checked out if you like that kind of thing. Next one is Farmington Hills at 45. Farmington Hills is fun because the city of, or the episode of Supernatural that was all X-Files and was supposed to be like UFOs, but was actually the good folk. That in-universe took place in Farmington Hills.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. There's a sign of them in that episode, like now as they're driving, it says like now entering Farmington Hills. So there's that. With number 7, with 50, is Warren, Michigan, which is One of the first places I visited after I moved here and where some friends of mine currently live. So that's just like right down the road. Number 6, 54. Favorite word, Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Ooh.
And yep. Number 5 with 58 is Ann Arbor. Number 4 with 61 is Flint. Number 3 with 65 is Lansing. Number 2 with 103 is Detroit. Now, before we get to number 1, this is a lot of UFO reports. Like 42 and 44 and 45 and 50 and 54, 58, 61, 65, 103. That's a lot of sightings. Even if like 0.2% of those are real, that's
Right.
something. Yeah. And then, honestly, I thought Detroit was going to have the most. But number 1, topping with 125, is Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Oh.
So Michigan is no stranger to UFO sightings. And honestly, I kind of would like to see all of these new Fork reports and just get a chance to read them. Seems interesting. I might be getting into like that kind of thing. We might have more UFO stories coming up. But so there's that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was a Reddit post that I found. Let me find it. The other thing I'm going to include in our show notes is let's see. Oh, holy crap. So we're recording this on April 5th. This video from Click on Detroit Local 4 WDIV from April 5th, 2018
Wow.
is a woman in Detroit recording what is a UFO sighting. She is narrating while filming this light, and she is emphatic that this is a UFO. I would love it if our listeners took a look at it and let us know what they thought of it. I think that'd be really cool. We are on Blue Sky under Serrana's Void. You can find our podcast on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky under the alias Elfin Rake. Gabby, what's your Blue Sky handle?
I'm under Cathonia.
Rock on. And you can write us at the email addresses we gave before. We would really love to hear what you think of this. Yeah, or comment on our YouTube video. But that being said, the Reddit story, I thought this was really interesting because what they provided was a lot of like really hard and fast like locations. Like I could pull all of these spaces up in Google Maps and be like, oh yeah, everything they said makes sense. So this took place, I'm just going to read it verbatim. This is from user Black on Black 313 who submitted this 1 year ago to the Detroit subreddit. And I'm reading from user Finn Noodles reposting of it in the comments because they fixed the formatting. So I'm going to start on the second one. So the first one was there's 2 stories here. The first one is mother, sister, and neighbors vehemently exclaimed it was a UFO. There was some question over the user thinks they may have seen a blimp, which I can tell you as a child, I was taken on a wild goose chase by my mom who thought we were following a UFO one time and turned out to be a blimp.
Oh.
So that hits hard. Like I still burned in my memory is that moment when the blimp rotated to turn and we caught a different angle of it in the night sky and realized it was a blimp and not a glowing orb in the sky.
Aww.
So, but I remember how uncontrolled my mom was with her excitement and her emotions on that. And that's what stuck with me. I think it's important to stay grounded. And I've not always done that. Even though I've thought of this story very, very often in my life, that kind of generational anxiety and excitement can stick with you if that's what you've known. And it takes work if that's something you're working on. So moving forward from that, there was that little preamble about the blimp. But here's the actual, here's the event. So I experienced an unusual event when I was young in the mid-70s living in East Detroit. I looked up these places, and it's in a neighborhood just outside of Detroit called East Point, which is over towards... Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Which is over towards Lake St. Clair, which is a little lake that connects Lake Huron to Lake Erie via a couple rivers, one of them being like the famous Detroit River, and the other one being, it looks like above Lake St. Clair, it's known as the St. Clair River. But this is not a small lake. It is a pretty big lake. Anyway, so East Point, and the writer says, I experienced an unusual event when I was young in the mid-1970s living in East Detroit. I believe the date may be September 15th, 1974, a Sunday, but I am not sure. Sunday in parentheses. It was near dusk in the late summer or early fall. I remember I had school the next day at Kettner Elementary, now closed since the early 2000s. My sister yelled a plane was on fire. I went out to see a saucer-shaped metallic craft with colored lights revolving clockwise around its rim. It was floating westward along where Topher Road is approximately 500 feet to 1,000 feet and silent. The size I estimate was about the length of a semi-truck. So I'm reading that to think it's at 500 to 1,000 feet in the air at about semi-truck size, so not small. My mother, sister, and many neighbors, both old and young, all down the block of Gascony Street, came out and were in pointing and shouting, reading this as written now. Everyone was in awe, and I recall it was both scary and bewildering to all. It moved slowly, and I lost it over the horizon near Kettner Elementary School. My mother called the East Detroit police, but the lines were busy with numerous calls. People were freaking out. I thought I saw windows in the front of the disc-shaped object resembling the Lost in Space Jupiter TV show craft, except with colored revolving lights around the disc edge. There's an image attached, and I'll attach this Reddit post to our show notes, but it's basically your classical like 1950s, 60s saucer shape is what he's reporting. Mm-hmm. And let me go back to my map. So, and this time it was actually headed away from the water, which is interesting. So if we follow his reports, Gascony and then Kettner was the other direction. Oh my, oh gosh, okay. Mm-hmm. But that's a little entire neighborhood in what we say 1974, witnessing a UFO in East Detroit.
That is super wild.
Yeah.
And like it's sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking, riffing out loud. I wonder if any of those were in the New Fork reports.
Ooh.
We might have to reach out to some local researchers and see. Maybe we can find out some more.
Yes. Oh, it'd be so cool to have some like researchers on like talking about kind of like their archives and, you know, what evidence they have.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be something we can do. Very cool. I'm getting some ideas. But yeah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think it's so fascinating that a lot of these stories happened, you know, well before, you know, we had this sort of drone technology. Like nowadays, seeing lights in the sky, it's sort of, you know, we're desensitized to it because we just see it so often.
Yeah.
But back then, like in the 70s, like we just didn't have that technology yet. So What is that? Like this giant object in the sky.
Yeah, and this was a communal shared experience amongst many people on a Sunday for some unexplained thing. So this was like a day when everybody's off in the 70s on a Sunday, right? Mm-hmm. These are tight-knit, pretty close neighborhoods. Like these are like neighborhoods with like small single-family houses just right next to each other, like your classic like suburbia. And then there's just a UFO with colored lights revolving around the bottom, just like, I mean, 500 to 1,000 feet. That's the Detroit story of the UFO. What do you think, Gabby? How are you feeling?
I think that's super cool. And, you know, maybe for a future episode, it might be fun to talk about our listeners' stories, you know, maybe collect a few interesting, experiences and, read them out for people.
That sounds amazing. If you're listening to this, we would love to hear your experiences. No judgment. This is a safe place, and we hope you would share them with us for sure.
Yep, nothing's too weird. I've seen
trust us.
I've seen enough weird stuff. Nothing's going to faze me anymore.
Same. Well, I'm not issuing that challenge to the universe, but pretty close to it. I feel it. Listeners, we appreciate you. We hope you will reach out to us. Let us know your stories. Let us know what you thought. Let us know you're listening. And we will be back next week. And Gabby, do we know who we're having next week? Have we thought that far ahead?
I think it's Malleus. I think it is.
Ooh.
Yes, so
it is.
Chatting about alchemy and his new upcoming book.
Oh, okay. I'm excited about that. I do love some alchemy. And then after that, we've got Miguel Romero, known as Red Pill Junkie, following that. So stick around, listen, write in. No email is too weird for us. Let us know you're out there. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Eternal Void, but with Jazz Podcast. Don't forget, we do have a Ko-Fi. You can take $1 or $2, wad them up real tight and throw it real hard up the internet pipes to us. It'll go straight to keeping podcast hosting platform paid for. Thank you all so much for your support. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.